Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the pre-bid conference for the KCK Redevelopment RFQs. We'll get started in just a second as we let people roll on into the meeting. All right, it looks like our participants have plateaued a bit. We still have a few people signing in accordingly. I think we'll go ahead and get started for everybody who's joined us. Again, thank you very much. My name is Gunnar Han. I'm the Director of Planning and Urban Design for the Unified Government, and we're going to start with Ms. Teresa Hutchins.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for joining us today for our pre-bid conference for the two requests for qualifications, KCK Redevelopment Lead Developer and Sub-Consultant / Contractor. I am Teresa Hutchins. I'm the buyer for this project. Any questions for the project should be emailed to me. All of my contact information will be in the documents that will be released later this afternoon. And now with the message is our interim county administrator, Ms. Cheryl Harrison Lee.
Thank you for joining us. We are excited to have you participate in this process for the 3 properties that are owned by the Unified Government. The Mayor and Commission have prioritized economic development as a key way of being able to address some of the budget shortfalls that exist in Wyandotte County. We are looking forward to having developers partner with us in this initiative. As such, we're looking to leverage our land development property along with other private properties that you may have that will allow us to be able to create economic development opportunities. Today, we're going to have an opportunity for you to hear from staff and our consultants who have been assisting us in developing the RFQ process. We are interested in encouraging development opportunities by small businesses and minorities. To that end, we've structured this that will create lower barriers to entry. At this time, I'll turn it over to our staff so that they can start the process of walking you through what the RFQ will look like and the timeline. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to receiving your proposals.
All right. Again, my name is Gunnar Han, Director of Planning and Urban Design. I'm just going to quickly run through the agenda and a few other items before we pass it off to Mr. Justin Carney with Development Strategies, who's been assisting the Unified Government in this effort. So we've had the welcome. Obviously, we wanted to talk a little bit about how this project fits into the larger work that's happening across the Unified Government, specifically in our 2023 year of visioning, as we, for the first time, create a comprehensive plan for the Unified Government. Excuse me, we'll go over the sites of the 3 individual sites up for RFQ and eventual RFPs. We'll discuss quickly some of the components of the actual RFP process, how that then transitions into the RFP process. And at the end of the presentation this morning, excuse me, we will be open for questions. We will be taking questions in the chat. So if you all prepare for that in anticipation, that would be much appreciated. Happy to preload any questions in there as we're going through this presentation. We do have staff who will help us navigate those and go through all of them at the end. So first and foremost, for those of you who aren't familiar, last year, the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas adopted for the first time ever a countywide mobility strategy. That's effectively acting as the transportation element of our ongoing process to create for the first time a comprehensive plan in the Unified Government. And this is built upon a bunch of other work that we're already have been doing and continue to do at the UG, be it the Community Health Improvement Plan with the Public Health Department, existing and other focused area plans that have been developed over the last few years, as well as the recently adopted Community Development Consolidated Plan from our Community Development Department. For those who were in attendance at the webinar, we discussed this a little bit as well. We are also in the process of updating a housing strategy, creating an economic development strategy, updating our land bank policy at the unified government. And I say all of these things, again, to say that this RFP process is something new for the unified government. It's a bit of a beta test. And as we try and look to the next 25 years of the unified government and setting that new North Star, we wanted to test new ways to move our community forward. And so here we are with this RFP process. It is in effect implementation of the comp plan starting at day one of the comp planning process. With that, we'll quickly move to the 3 unified government sites. For those of you who are also in attendance in the webinar, this will look familiar. The first site, the first site is the old former Indian Springs Mall site. This is right at State Avenue and I-635. It's the largest site that we are proposing in this RFQ process. It currently has an existing transit center. The most frequent transit service in the unified government happens from that transit center into downtown Kansas City, Kansas at the 7th Street Transit, between it and the 7th Street Transit Center. So we're right at the termini, if you will, of one of our most frequent transit lines. That transit line continues out to the Legends on State Avenue farther west. So State Avenue is our primary transit corridor. As such, the UG is looking to create a transit-oriented development at this location. We've had many starts and fits at this location, many development agreements that have not worked out for many different reasons. And this is our most recent attempt at redeveloping this site. As recent as last year, the unified government, after the last development proposal fell through, did a community engagement, hosted a community engagement meeting about the site, which confirmed, again, previous engagements with the public on this site that what we're looking for is a dense, walkable, transit-oriented development. Transit-oriented development. The site is large. It could include many things. It could also be phased potentially. We're open to have conversations and see any ideas that corner. If we wanted to simply turn this into a spec industrial district, we could have done that 10 years ago. That is not what we're trying to do with this site. The second site is at 4th and Minnesota. Again, we call this the triangle site. You can see right there in the bottom right-hand side of the screen, that is the off-ramp, if you will, for Minnesota Avenue of the Lewis and Clark Viaduct, a freeway between downtown Kansas City, Missouri and into downtown Kansas City, Kansas. It's a smaller site. It does have, it's not a perfect rectangle. It is somewhat oddly shaped as it kind of goes around an existing parcel property and business, but it does connect to Minnesota Avenue directly. So there is a direct pedestrian connection into the downtown core of Kansas City, Kansas. It is also kitty corner, if you will, from the Merck Co-op, a local grocery store that's been in business for the last couple of years in downtown Kansas City, Kansas. This site in particular, I think, would not have too much entitlement work on it, as it is already zoned and land use to be a pretty dense urban development, be that mixed use, retail, commercial, retail, office, or residential in general. Again, pretty commanding views of the Kansas and Missouri River valleys, of the confluence of the Kansas and the Missouri rivers, and of the skyline of Kansas City, Missouri at this location. Again, this is about 2 blocks away from that transit center and across the street from one of the transit stops on the south side of Minnesota into Kansas City, Missouri. I'd also note specifically, although there's a lot of off-ramps, on-ramps, and freeways in its way, it is only a few hundred feet from the American Riverfront Heritage Trail. That's a bike ped trail that goes underneath I-70 and ends up all the way into Berkeley Riverfront Park in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. The third site is 18th Quindaro. Specifically, we're looking at the southeast quadrant of that intersection. Specifically, this site is targeted for a grocery store. Now, there are multiple grocery stores and multiple folks trying to implement grocery stores in the Northeast. The unified government sees this as an opportunity to sort of bring all of those together and define a path forward. The RFQ does include an appendices of a market analysis that was done a few years ago for a grocery store in the broader Northeast area of Kansas City, Kansas. It also this site is probably further complicated by the fact that additional land assemblage will be required of private development. You can see in the bottom left hand of this slide, everything in red is an existing land bank lot. That still leaves existing homes, businesses, and vacant lots owned in private ownership that would have to be assembled to do something. Now, this could be just a grocery store. It could be a mixed-use development with a grocery store. It could be a phased development. But the key here being is we're really looking to have a conversation about a grocery store in the Northeast. And this site was selected for that location. It is also kitty corner from the local, we call them neighborhood business revitalization organizations. In this part of town, it's called Groundworks Energy. They, for the last couple of years, have been working on what they're calling the Northeast Grocer, which is in the northwest quadrant of this intersection. So again, a lot of engagement needs to happen on this site before we release an RFP. And we look forward to this being the mechanism by which we bring all these disparate efforts together. Before I pass it off to Mr. Carney, the one thing I would just additionally like to mention is that the RFQ will also include a market trends report, and we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. This is some background information for potential lead developers and or subcontractors, subconsultants. We do anticipate engagement at all the sites. That might vary depending on their complexity and need. And then finally, just as a quick note, all of these sites will be open and available to move forward with development agreements when the time is right. And all of these sites will most likely need to do some level of land entitlement, some more than others. And with that, I'll pass it off to Mr. Justin Carney with Development Strategies.
Great, thank you. So those are the three sites, and we have been working with the unified government around this RFP process, and early on kind of identified the benefits of having kind of a dual phased approach with a request for qualifications that would eventually lead into a request for proposals. Given kind of the diversity of the three sites, the opportunities at the three sites, and the various levels of complexity, it was kind of decided that we would start with an RFQ, a request for qualifications process. We're doing that throughout March. We're launching that now. We'll be looking for those submittals on the qualifications throughout the month of April. While those are happening, we will begin to do market analyses and some community outreach and having meetings at each of the sites to begin to provide some background, additional background understanding, and to start the community conversations, reignite the community conversations around these as the developers are submitting their qualifications. We will be doing that throughout the spring and early summer. And then, with that baseline of engagement, with the baseline of the market analyses, with the understanding that comes from the market trends report, hopefully we will have enough information then as we launch the request for proposals to be able to tell developers, here's what the initial early conversations, here's what the initial analysis is showing, kind of get arrows for each of the three sites pointing in certain directions that will give some better direction to the developers as they consider what their proposals are for each site, what their teaming is, what the teaming opportunities are for those proposals, and what they would be submitting to us. Right now, the timeline is looking at summertime for the launch of the RFP and the request and for those proposals to come back in, looking at late summer then for the evaluation of those proposals, and then moving forward. As we continue to have conversations here around each of the three sites, there may be some refinement to this schedule specific to each of the three sites. And we would be communicating that as we continue to have our engagement and market analyses efforts. So, some folks are asking or have asked, why are we doing an RFQ process and what exactly is an RFQ process? Some folks are familiar with what a request for proposals is. Why are we doing a request for qualifications? And a lot of times we recommend doing an RFQ process as a way to allow in this case, the unified government to understand, who's interested in what sites, because we're doing multiple sites. And there may be a variety of interest and folks just focused on one or the other. It's an opportunity for all of us as a community to have these conversations and for people to understand, hey, I was focused over here, but there might be another opportunity over here with one of the other sites. And it just creates a step that allows folks to understand the opportunities and respond to that. One of the other benefits of doing an RFQ process is that in some instances, it's a lower bar, like a lower barrier of entry. A request for proposals usually requires the creation of a team, the idea of the creation of a concept and a proposal, and a lot of detail that then gets put forward and evaluated. And at the RFQ phase, we're not asking for all of that hard thinking and all of the effort at teaming and conceptualizing a proposal to happen now to express an interest. What we're really looking for is for community members, for developers, for subcontractors to raise their hand and let the unified government know, yes, we're interested in being a part of this development, and here's how we're interested in being a part of this, and here's how we're qualified in being a part of this. And the final thing that this process is going to allow us to do is to have that list of and vet the list of proposed lead contractors and developers that would be interested in each of the 3 sites. Let us see what those are and evaluate them for who we want to move forward with that. But then doing the subcontractor RFQ is also allowing us to have and understand and identify the pool of contractors and subconsultants that are out there and are interested prior to a teaming phase, so that the developers, the prime developers, can look at that list and say, yes, there's some real value here. There's some real community assets and community expertise that I want to tap into and that I didn't know about because except for this process. And so we're hoping that the subcontractors responding to this will create a pool that will allow our lead developers to really look at the expertise that's here in the community and tap them as part of their team when they move forward to the proposal phase. And so then that is the proposal phase. What is the RFP? And for those of you that may be familiar with an RFP, but how this moves into that next process, through the RFQ phase with at least the prime lead developers, we will be making a selection of the developers that will move on and be allowed to respond to the RFP phase. Again, it's that opportunity where the critical thinking, the creative thinking will happen, the teaming opportunities will happen. One of the things that we hope out of this subcontractor list is maybe there are elements that would be put into the proposal that might not have been, except that the lead developers are looking at the pool of talent and expertise and saying, wow, this could really add value to that opportunity. Having the RFP process is also going to allow, as I said, a little bit of engagement on the unified government's part, a little bit of doing the market analyses for the 3 sites. So you will have the benefit of that input when you're crafting your proposals. And so at that point, what we're really looking for is, it says here, creative market supported developments. The community is going to have some goals. The market is going to point in certain directions, and hopefully that will spark some creativity and limit kind of just throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. We really want to have the best proposals from the development teams as possible. And again, looking to do that in late summer for this process. So I just want to kind of summarize my part to say, in addition, to the engagement, to the market analyses that we will have specific for each of the 3 sites, I just wanted to kind of mention again the market trends report. It's being done as part of the economic strategy for KCK, but utilizing the baseline report that they have now, which will be included in the RFQ that you have, will begin to set the stage for that top level understanding of economic conditions, workforce conditions, what is the industry mix, and it'll start to help, I think, point from an economic development perspective, some of the thinking and thoughts that could happen at each of these three very distinct and very different sites.
Thank you, Mr. Carney. Again, Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Design for the Unified Government. Just a couple announcements we'd like to make before we open it up for Q&A for anybody who has any questions. Again, the RFQ will be released on the UG's website today at noon, so pretty quick. Again, it's 2 RFQs, one for a lead developer and one for a subconsultant, subcontractors. As soon as that RFQ is released, all questions need to be directed to the buyer for the Unified Government, Ms. Teresa Hutchins. And you can find more information. Again, it's somewhat of an iterative process, as Mr. Carney mentioned, between RFQ and RFP release. For all updates and additional information, we would ask that you go to wykokck.org//redevelopment. That has all the documentation of the webinar that was held this past February. It will include all of this presentation as well as the market trends report, I think, is actually up on that website right now. The recording of this video and other information as is released will show up on that web location. So we'd ask you to review that on occasion as we continually update. For those of you who did register, both at this event and the webinar in February, we have your contact information. So for major announcements, we also have the opportunity, and we will be sending out regular email updates for those of you accordingly. With that, I would turn to Ms. Marcy if we have any questions.
Thanks. We do have one in the chat. So it is about the schedule. The question is, what is the projected date to announce the awardees? And the second follow-up is, what is the projected date the redevelopments will begin?
Both RFQs, that's all we know thus far. Both RFQ deadlines will be April 27th, which I think is a Thursday at 2 p.m. From there will be probably a couple of weeks that it will take to review those qualifications and then announce who has been pre-qualified for that work. While we are waiting for the submission period to close, we will continue with the work that Mr. Carney previously mentioned in terms of outreach, in terms of beginning the market analyses for these sites. And we think that should shape the rest of the calendar year. Again, we hope RFPs are released and awarded in the summer of 2023. After that awardee, entitlements and development agreement processes can begin as soon as that selected team or lead developer is chosen for that opportunity. So there's a hypothetical world where these developments could begin at least be entitled and moving through the building permit and other processes before construction by the end of this year. We're hoping that we can break ground on some, if not all, of these sites in 2024. I think I answered all the questions, right?
Yep. We have another one here. Who is evaluating the RFQs and RFPs, and can we expect to know what their selection criteria will be?
The selection criteria for the RFQ is included in the RFQ. There's one for each 3 sites. They're pretty much the same, but a little different because they are 3 different contexts and 3 different types of projects that we're looking for, scale and size and use. Excuse me. The RFQ will state or does state that the CAO will pick the selection committee of UG. It will be composed of UG employees. We anticipate the same will happen with the RFP process. And it'll be a diverse group of folks who are engaged in this. potentially myself, potentially others in community development, economic development, the CAO's office, finance, and others. Still to be determined.
Okay, another question is how will the UG's preservation master plan and citywide master plan process impact and interact with this process?
That's a good question. So again, I think that looking to the next 25 years of the unified government, we had a program called UG Forward that was started this past year in 2022 that really tried to rethink how the UG itself is organized and provides its services. So coming out of that, we see this as an opportunity to redefine how we do community development in Kansas City, Kansas. As such, this process and all of its public engagement will, to some degree, also be the outreach and public engagement for those other processes. Land use, historic preservation, ecological restoration, public safety, utilities, all these things I think go into both the comprehensive plan and these discussions because these are relatively complex infill development sites. And so we hope that the engagement events for these are also opportunities to learn more about historic preservation plan and the comprehensive plan that are also ongoing.
So we do not have any other questions right now. If anyone has some, if you could please drop that in the chat.
And while we're waiting, I'll just make one, I think, point that I forgot to make earlier in the presentation, or maybe perhaps reiterate a point that was made a little bit earlier. Our current thinking at the RFP stage, which is still to be developed, but our current thinking at the RFP stage is that you have to be pre-qualified as a lead developer to submit for one of the 3 RFPs. Hard stop. We would prefer as many subconsultants and subcontractors independently submit to this RFQ, but in the spirit of reducing the barriers to entry, other subconsultants and subcontractors who do not pre-qualify in this RFQ will be allowed to submit because things change, teams evolve in the RFP process. But those subconsultants and subcontractors who did go through and were pre-qualified in the RFQ phase will carry with them some level of bonus in the scoring of the RFPs. So we're encouraging people to submit to the RFQ and providing some incentive to do so.
We have no other questions this time.
All right, I'm going to give everybody one more minute and then we'll close this off. Again, I think our deadline, I'm going to get the date wrong. When you see the RFQ and it comes out, I think we have 1 week for a question and answer period. So if you read the RFQ, have any additional questions or answers, again, please reach out to Ms. Hugins, our buyer in the procurement department. She will forward that off to the team working on this, and we'll get everybody answers to those questions. And then those questions will probably be collated over time, collated in the week after that question deadline, and we'll post those to the website again, wykokck.org/redevelopment.
We do have another question, a couple coming in. So do we submit to the RFQ as a prime contractor or sub? I'm guessing that's an either or question.
It depends on what you are. If you are a developer, you would want to submit to the lead developer. If you're anything else, you'd want to submit to the subconsultant subcontractor. Our thinking in the terminology of these is the lead developer will be the prime for the future RFPs, and then any team members they bring with them are their subs.
Okay, so we have a question about sharing the consultants that are leading the historic preservation plan and the citywide master plan or comprehensive plan. Can we share consultants?
Yes, we are still working through contract negotiations for the consultant on the citywide comprehensive plan update, but we did just sign the contract for the Lakota group, who will be our prime for the citywide historic preservation plan. We have already selected a team led by a firm called Future IQ to lead the economic development strategy. And just outside of the picture here, we have Mr. Dwayne Bright, who's our Fuse Housing Fellow, who is leading the housing strategy efforts, which will effectively become the housing chapter in the comp plan.
All right.
Come on, Dwayne, peek in and say hi. There he is.
Another question here, will you encourage any teaming between developers and subs for particular sites at the RFQ stage?
At the RFQ stage, no. I think at this point, and I'm not even sure that we would encourage or dictate, I certainly wouldn't dictate, but I don't even know if we would necessarily encourage teaming at the RFP phase either. So what we're trying to, just to reiterate, what we're trying to accomplish here is a pre-qualified list of lead developers that would move on to that proposal phase, and then an identification and pre-qualification, but not necessarily losing anybody from the subcontractor phase. The idea is to generate that pool of subcontractors, service providers, other subconsultants that would be part of a proposal, that could be part of a proposal. And by identifying them now and showing off the various expertise of people that of organizations, of companies that were interested in these 3 development sites, then sort of displaying for the lead firms, here's how other subcontractors are thinking about these sites. And again, maybe a lead developer hasn't thought of a particular element, but sees that list and can bring that into the teaming. So no, not necessarily any preconceived notion, other than I do think if you look at the criteria for each of the sites, we certainly have included language and our understanding, initial understanding and kind of initial concepts that I think very clearly point to some elements that might be unique of the 3 sites that we certainly have our eye on already, and hopefully will guide, some of that from the developer side of things.
And Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Urban Design, just to pile on a little bit on that one, I'd say the unified government does not want to get into the business of marrying consultants at the RFP stage. I believe our contract language in the RFQ and in subsequent RFPs is not too ordinary from other language from municipalities that would allow us to do something like that. But I don't think that's really where we want to head. I would focus, if I were you, I would focus on the language of the RFQ that specifically talks about having a community-driven community development process. And the fact that we're trying to define and reimagine what that is in the unified government, we would expect, as it said in the previous slides, a creative solution to do so. So I know a lot of developers and teams have teams they like to work with or consultants they like to work with. They may have a comfortable grouping that they want to move forward with, and that's fine, but we would encourage you to look outside of your comfort zone and try to do something a little different, as we are also trying to do something innovative and different at the unified government.
I have 2 somewhat related questions. So can you provide direction to finding the pre-qualified contractor subs list? And then will lead developers determine or select who is on their team for the RFP and ultimately the project?
So the pre-qualified subconsultant subcontractor list is part of this vetting process. And so that will happen after the submittal of the qualifications and the review. And so again, assuming there's a couple of week period after those qualifications are submitted, we'd be looking at or late April, early May for that list, and that will be provided with ample time to be, considering future teaming options. And could you just mention the second half of that question again?
Yep. So will lead developers determine or select who is on their team for the RFP?
Right. And again, yes. I mean, as Mr. Hand just said, the intent from the UG is not to put these, is to not to dictate the teaming and not to dictate the teams and the proposals. It is very much up to the lead developers to put their teams together and make them as responsive to the individual sites as possible. And then just to further clarify, part of that teaming and what's, I think, hopefully going to inform how the lead developers are putting their teams together is there will be an RFP with additional, with future criteria and judging criteria and evaluation that is going to guide some of that as well. And that will evolve from the RFQs. So it won't just be a transfer of the same point system. There'll be an evolution of that as we move forward so that we can really get at the proposal evaluation.
And Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Urban Design, I would just add, I think our intent is to provide as much transparency throughout this process so that a pre-qualified list of sub-consultants can see who the pre-qualified list of lead developers are. Sub-consultants can call primes and primes can reach out to subs, and then everybody who didn't pre-qualify can look at those lists and do their regular business development work.
Okay, we do not have any questions. Oh, I spoke too soon. Can you define what the UG Public Health Department understands as diverse teams, considering the current panel and department leading the discussion is narrowly diverse?
It's Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Urban Design. I appreciate that comment. Don't exactly know how to answer it. I think what I would say is the new CAO, who will begin on next Monday, will effectively be creating the selection committee. I think we are trying to be intentional about these sites and the teams and how we go about this process. So I think we are very much working forward in the spirit of, again, transparency, but also inclusivity. And we are who we are.
Does anyone have any last minute questions they want to drop in the chat?
If I may, I would just double down. Diverse teams is also the type of firms, not just who is on those firms. So I think in that sense, the RFQ and diversity means both of those things. All right, last call for questions. Right now, at least. Again, plenty of time over the next week to.
Okay, we have another question about community benefit agreements.
I'll start that just by saying that the community benefits agreement, I fully expect that to be part of the development process and discuss in much more detail through the engagement, through the processing of our conversations of developing the RFPs. But then once a developer is selected, that is something that happens at a later phase and isn't really a part of this RFQ phase.
Edgar, could you maybe expand on what you mean by mixed income?
I think I know what he's getting at.
Okay.
And Director of Planning and Urban Design, in the spirit of, quite frankly, all of the long-range plans that have been adopted by the Board of Commissioners, the goal is always to create a mixed income community. So yes, we hope that these projects advance that larger goal. As we've had previous conversations during previous developments, the UG currently doesn't have any exact tools to implement that, and what creates a mixed income community is a topic of conversation that I think we will continue in our comprehensive plan update. But again, as we are doing this, let's call it implementation action, while we're doing this policy development in the broader scheme of things, we think we can be intentional, and we think we can be a little more direct about what mixed income should be for each development site. And we would look to the community to participate in the outreach process for each site to help inform the UG how to write that in those RFPs.
We also have a follow-up question about mixed uses as a requirement of the development.
Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Design. Again, I think that depending on what the site is, it could be a very different thing. I think when I say mixed use, at least I'm thinking vertical mixed use more than horizontal mixed use across a large site, like for instance, the Indian Springs Mall site. Again, I think we have probably the best opportunity of any of the sites at Indian Springs Mall site to create a true transit-oriented development project. So I think that would come with the requisite vertical mixed use. The composition of that mixed use is kind of open and to be determined by the market. We do know that there's housing demand across the region and as well as in the unified government. And so again, it kind of depends on what the site is, but I think we're looking to create walkable communities.
So we have a question about MBWBE and UG local business enterprises. Is that just encouraged in this process, or is it going to be weighted differently?
It's a great question. Thank you for asking that. A few years ago, the unified government's DBE ordinance lapsed. It has not been updated, and so therefore there is no DBE requirement in this or any RFQ, RFP, or other procurement with the unified government. So therefore we can only express a preference for a diverse team of consultants for this project. Because there's no ordinance, we can also not score that preference either in our evaluation criteria.
Yeah, and if I can just add, from the standpoint of what we are considering, it's not directly related to WBE, DBE requirements, but there is a desire and a preference put on local, county, city, regional firms, companies, service providers to be considered at the qualifications phase and also at the RFP phase. So to the extent that there's a preference for really tapping into that local expertise and local companies that could provide provide a different perspective, I think that's where you probably see that. And I know that's slightly different than the explicit question, but just something that we've been considering greatly.
I have a question about the larger policy at the UG. So are we working on regulations that would include requirements for mixed income, mixed use, and CBAs as part of the development process?
Gunnar Hand, Director of Planning and Urban Design. I believe the comprehensive plan update process will have conversations about those policies. I would not expect that those policy discussions would come to any conclusion by the time that this RFQ or RFP process is completed or is ongoing, but I do expect that those conversations would certainly influence this process. All right, I'm going to make the announcement for a third time. If anybody has any last questions, please add them now. Otherwise, we're going to close out this pre-bid conference. We appreciate everybody's attendance this morning, your time and efforts on any subsequent work submitting to these RFQs. Again, they will be up, and a question just popped up. Again, the RFQs will be dropped on the UG's procurement website, which is right here on the screen. You can also just Google UG RFP RFQs and it'll bring you to the full list of RFPs, RFQs. Those will be released at noon today in about 16 minutes. Ms. Hutchins is probably working on that right now.
And as for this last question, if you go to wicokck.org/redevelopment, you'll be able to find all presentations and recordings.
Yeah, we'll get these recordings and presentations up there as soon as possible. Any last thoughts? Got anything else? Great. All right. Thank you, everybody. We look forward to working with you all. Again, if you have any questions, please direct them to Ms. Teresa Hutchins at least in 15 minutes. Have a great day.